right, so today we're going deep on something pretty wild.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever heard of a virtual water treatment plant?
Like in the cloud?
No, like actually built in somebody's basement.
Wow.
Back in 2012, this cybersecurity researcher, Kyle Wilhoit, he created this whole elaborate honeypot.
A honeypot.
Yeah, it was like a fake industrial control system, the kind they use in real water plants and stuff.
Okay, I'm following.
And he put up this fake website, the whole works work.
So why'd he do all that?
Well, he wanted to see how hackers would try to, break into critical infrastructure.
Makes sense. A virtual plant's a lot safer to experiment with than a real one.
Exactly. And get this, he actually found something super interesting.
What'd he find?
One specific attack really stood out.
What was it? Like some kind of new malware?
Not exactly. See, most attacks on these kinds of systems, they're all about, disruption.
Right, like shutting things down, causing chaos.
Yeah, but this one was different. They were after the virtual plant's equivalent documentation.
Huh. That's weird. Why still documents?
Well, Wilhoit, he dug deeper and traced this back to a server in China.
China?
Yeah, and this server was packed with stolen data from all sorts of companies.
Sounds like he stumbled onto something much bigger than just some random hack.
He did. It was part of a much larger operation called Operation Shady Rat.
Shady Rat, huh? That's a catchy name.
Yeah, but the operation itself was anything but fun and games. This thing actually goes all the way back to 2006.
2006? Wow, that's a while ago.
Imagine just a regular day, you're an employee at, let's say, a construction company in South Korea.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You get this email, looks like it's from a colleague.
Seems harmless enough.
Right. But English to the law of, grammar mistakes, that kind of thing.
So maybe a little suspicious, but not totally out of the ordinary.
Exactly. And there's an attachment.
Uh-oh, here we go.
Now, this attachment, it can be disguised as anything. A document, a spreadsheet, even a screensaver.
Sneaky.
And boom, that's it. That's how they got in.
What was in the attachment?
It was a Trojan horse, a type of malware. Once you open it, it gives the attackers remote access to your computer and potentially the whole company network.
Like a digital rat burrowing into the system.
Exactly. And they wouldn't just send one email.
They keep trying.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
If the first email failed, they'd send another and another, sometimes even engaging in like full-blown conversations with the victim.
Wow, talk about persistence.
All to get them to open that attachment and let the rat in.
So back then, were these kinds of attacks common?
Oh, yeah. Cybersecurity wasn't as sophisticated as it is today.
Right, so these Trojan horse attacks were probably pretty effective.
They were everywhere. Dozens of companies got hit with similar attacks, each email carefully crafted to trick people into opening those malicious attachments.
So it was a pretty widespread problem. Did anyone suspect who was behind it at the time?
There were definitely suspicions, but nobody had concrete evidence.
So how did they finally figure it out?
Well, in 2011, a team at McAfee, the cybersecurity company,
Yeah, I know McAfee.
they did something pretty audacious. They managed to hack into one of the attackers' servers.
Hack the hackers, huh? Bold move.
And what they found was a treasure trove of stolen data, along with detailed logs of all the companies that had been targeted by Shady Rat.
So finally, proof that this was a coordinated campaign, not just random attacks.
Exactly. But the big question remained. Who was actually pulling the strings?
Right. Who was behind Shady Rat?
That took another 2 years to figure out. It was 2013 when Mandiant, which is now part of Google, they did this really deep dive investigation.
So what did they find?
They meticulously followed the digital trail, and it led them right to the source, a unit within the Chinese military.
Whoa, hold on. Are we talking about state-sponsored hacking here?
Yep. This unit, known as Unit 61398, was operating out of a building in Shanghai with hundreds of personnel, all dedicated to cyber espionage.
So this wasn't just some random group of hackers. This was a full-blown government-backed operation.
Exactly. And get this, their operational security was surprisingly lax.
What do you mean?
Well, they weren't really hiding their tracks very well. Like, there were fingerprints all over their malware.
So they were sloppy.
Kind of. And there were even job postings online where former employees would brag about their hacking exploits.
That's pretty bold. Almost like they wanted to get caught.
It's baffling, right? You'd think if you were this good at infiltrating systems, you'd be a little more careful about covering your tracks.
So if they weren't trying to hide, what was their goal? What were they after?
Well, that brings us to the most fascinating part of this whole story. They were after something called technology transfer.
Technology transfer? What does that even mean?
Basically, they were trying to steal intellectual property and advanced technologies to boost their own industries and military capabilities.
Right. So industrial espionage on a global scale.
Exactly. They were playing a high-stakes game of catch-up, trying to close the gap with Western powers.
And Shady Rat was their tool for doing it.
Exactly. And they targeted a wide range of companies, from tech giants to defense contractors.
And we're talking about some pretty serious stuff they managed to steal, right?
Oh, yeah. One of the most high-profile cases involved Lockheed Martin.
Lockheed Martin. Isn't that the company that makes the F-35 fighter jet?
That's the one.
No way. Did they steal plans for the F-35?
Back in 2007, they did.
Through Shady Rat.
Yep. They infiltrated Lockheed's systems and siphoned off a ton of sensitive data, including information about the F-35 design and capabilities.
That's insane. They were able to get into one of the most secure companies in the world through a phishing email.
Remember, it wasn't just about getting someone to open an email. It was about planting those rat caves deep inside Lockheed's network.
And then just waiting patiently, gathering information over time.
Exactly. They were playing the long game.
It's scary how effective the strategy was. But stealing F-35 plans, that had to be a huge win for them, right?
Oh, absolutely. It gave them a massive shortcut in developing their own stealth fighter technology.
And they actually did that, didn't they? They developed their own stealth fighter jet.
They did. A few years after the Lockheed hack, China unveiled the Shenyang FC-31.
And it looks a lot like the F-35.
It does. And that's not a coincidence. It's widely believed that the stolen F-35 data played a key role in the FC-31's development.
So they basically used stolen technology to leapfrog ahead in their own military programs.
That's the gist of it.
That's pretty alarming. So if they were targeting fighter jets, what else were they after? Was it all military technology?
No, not at all. Shady Rat targeted a whole bunch of industries.
Like what?
Think construction, energy, manufacturing, technology, finance, you name it.
Wow, they were going after anything that could give them a competitive advantage.
Exactly. They were hoovering up trade secrets, proprietary software, financial data, even internal communications.
Sounds like they were building a massive intelligence database.
They were. And they were pretty good at it, at least for a while.
But eventually, the world caught on, right? What happened then? Did anyone try to stop them?
Oh, there were definitely attempts to confront China about their cyber activities.
Did it work?
Well, in 2015, the U.S. and China actually signed an agreement.
Really? What did it say?
They both pledged not to support cyber-enabled theft of intellectual property for commercial gain.
Sounds promising. Did they actually stick to it?
That's debatable.
What do you mean?
Well, China has always denied any involvement in state-sponsored hacking. They tend to deflect blame and often accuse the U.S. of doing the same thing.
So, a classic case of finger pointing.
Pretty much.
Okay.
But even though they never admitted fault, there were signs that Shady Rat started to change after being exposed.
How so? Did they shut down the operation?
Not exactly. They got more sophisticated, more careful.
What do you mean?
Well, for one, they started relying more on non-state actors.
Non-state actors?
Yeah, basically hired hackers, mercenaries in the cyber world.
Ah, so a way to create distance between themselves and the attacks.
Exactly. It made it much harder to directly link the attacks back to the Chinese government.
Smart. So they were getting sneakier.
They were. And they also started using more advanced techniques to hide their traffic and cover their tracks.
Remember how we were talking about how they were kind of sloppy in the early days?
Yeah.
Well, that changed. They became masters of disguise in the digital world.
So they went underground.
Yeah.
But did they actually stop? Did Shady Rat just disappear?
That's the million-dollar question. It's tough to say for sure. But there's evidence that Shady Rat, or at least its legacy, is still out there.
What do you mean by legacy?
Well, the tactics and techniques they pioneered, they've been adopted by other cyber espionage groups around the world.
So even if Shady Rat itself has gone quiet, the threat hasn't really gone away.
Exactly. And that brings us back to those rat caves we were talking about earlier.
Those hidden back doors in critical infrastructure.
Yep. Imagine one of those still active in a real water treatment plant or a power grid or a transportation system.
That's a chilling thought.
It is. The potential for disruption and sabotage is huge.
So what can we do about it? How do we protect ourselves against something that's so hidden and persistent?
That's the challenge, isn't it? But there are things we can do. We need to shift our mindset from reacting to attacks to actively hunting for them.
Actively hunting for them?
Yeah, think of it this way. Instead of waiting for a rat to show up in your house and then calling an exterminator, you regularly check for cracks in your foundation and seal them up.
Makes sense. So we need to be more proactive about cybersecurity.
Exactly. And that requires a multifaceted approach. We need better information sharing, stronger collaboration between governments and businesses.
So like a global neighborhood watch, but for cyber threats.
That's a great analogy. And we also need to really understand our adversaries, know their tactics, their motivations, their capabilities.
So knowledge is power.
It is. And in the case of Shady Rat, knowledge is our best defense.
That's a great point. So after diving deep into the world of Operation Shady Rat, what's the key takeaway for our listeners?
The threat of these advanced persistent threats, these APTs, it's real, and it's not going away anytime soon.
So we need to be vigilant.
We do, but we're not powerless. By learning from the past, being proactive, and working together, we can make it much harder for these attackers to succeed.
That's a good point. It's not about being scared. It's about being prepared.
Exactly. And I like to think of it this way. Russia's cyber attacks, they're like hurricanes and tornadoes. Sudden, destructive, but ultimately, we know how to deal with them.
We can see them coming. We can prepare.
Right. But China's approach, the Shady Rat approach, it's more like climate change.
That's an interesting analogy.
It's a slow, insidious threat, but it's just as dangerous, if not more so, and it requires a long-term strategic response.
So we need to change our thinking, adapt to this new reality.
We do. Complacency is not an option. The stakes are simply too high.
Well said. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into Operation Shady Rat.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It has. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. We know that these rat caves, these hidden back doors, they might still exist within the digital infrastructure that powers our world.
It's a sobering thought.
So knowing that, what should be done to address this threat? What steps should we be taking to protect ourselves? Until next time, stay vigilant.
And stay informed.
And stay curious.
Absolutely. The more we understand about these threats, the better equipped we'll be to defend against them.
So technology transfer. It sounds kind of vague.
Yeah, it's basically a fancy way of saying they were stealing ideas and tech to boost their own industries and military.
So industrial espionage.
Exactly. China was playing catch-up big time, trying to close the gap with the West.
And Shady Rat was their secret weapon.
Pretty much. They were after anything that could give them an edge. Trade secrets, software, you name it.
And it all tied back to those 5-year plans China was always talking about.
Right. They wanted to become a global superpower, and technology was key to that goal.
So Shady Rat was like their shortcut.
You could say that. They were stealing the future, one hack at a time.
So what kind of stuff did they actually manage to get their hands on?
Plenty. One of the biggest targets was Lockheed Martin.
The F-35 guys.
Yep. Back in 2007, Shady Rat hit them hard.
I remember hearing about that. Wasn't that a huge deal?
It was. They stole a ton of sensitive data, including details about the F-35's design and capabilities.
How did they even pull that off? Lockheed Martin's supposed to have top-notch security.
Remember, it wasn't about brute force. It was about patience, persistence.
Those rat caves again?
Exactly. They burrowed in, laid low, and quietly siphoned off information for months, maybe even years.
So they were playing the long game. But why go after the F-35 specifically? I mean, it's not like there was a shortage of other targets.
But think about it. The F-35 is one of the most advanced fighter jets in the world.
Yeah, it's like the crown jewel of American military technology.
Exactly. And China wanted to catch up fast.
So they steal the plans and then, what, just copy them?
Not exactly copy, but definitely use them for inspiration. And it worked. Just a few years after the Lockheed hack, China unveiled its own stealth fighter.
That's a Shenyang FC-31.
That's the one. And it bears a striking resemblance to the F-35.
So are you saying they basically reverse engineered the F-35 using stolen data?
It's hard to say for sure without concrete proof, but the timing is certainly suspicious.
Yeah, it's not exactly a coincidence.
And it highlights the strategic thinking behind Shady Rat. This wasn't just random hacking. They were going after specific technologies that would help them achieve their goals.
So fighter jets, but what else? I mean, surely they weren't just focused on military stuff.
Oh, no, they cast a wide net. Shady Rat targeted companies in pretty much every sector you can think of.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Construction, energy, manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, finance, even media.
Wow, they were going after everything.
Anything that could give them a competitive edge. Think trade secrets, proprietary software, customer data, even internal emails.
So it was a massive intelligence gathering operation, vacuuming up anything they could exploit.
Exactly. They were building a treasure trove of information that they could use to their advantage.
But the world eventually woke up to what was happening.
Right.
Someone had to try and put a stop to it.
There were definitely attempts to confront China about their cyber activity.
Did it work?
Well, in 2015, the US and China signed this big agreement, pledging not to support cyber-enabled theft for commercial gain.
Sounds promising. Did it actually change anything?
Hard to say. China's always denied any involvement in state-sponsored hacking, and they've often accused the US of doing the same thing.
So, more finger pointing.
Pretty much. But something definitely shifted after Shady Rat was exposed. They got a lot more careful, a lot more sophisticated.
So they didn't stop, they just evolved.
Exactly. They started relying more on non-state actors, basically hired hackers, to carry out their attacks.
So a way to create plausible deniability.
Exactly. Made it much harder to trace the attacks directly back to the Chinese government.
Clever. But they were still up to their old tricks.
Oh, yeah. But they got better at hiding their tracks. Remember how we were talking about how they were kind of sloppy in the early days?
Yeah, fingerprints all over the place.
Well, that changed. They became masters of disguise in the digital world.
So they went underground. But did they ever actually stop? Did Shady Rat disappear completely?
That's the unsettling question. It's hard to say for sure, but there's reason to believe that Shady Rat, or at least its legacy, is still out there.
What do you mean by legacy?
Well, the tactics and techniques they pioneered, they've been adopted by other cyber espionage groups around the world.
So even if Shady Rat itself has gone quiet, the threat hasn't really gone away.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole thing so unnerving. Those rat caves we were talking about earlier, those hidden back doors in critical infrastructure.
You're saying they could still be out there?
It's a chilling thought, isn't it? Imagine a rat cave still active in a real water treatment plant or a power grid or a transportation system, just waiting to be activated.
And we might not even know they're there until it's too late.
That's the scary part. And it highlights the need for a fundamental shift in how we approach cybersecurity.
So we're talking about a whole new way of thinking about cybersecurity. Not just reacting, but actively hunting for these threats.
Yeah, it's a big shift. But it's essential if we want to stay ahead of the curve.
Okay, but how do we actually do that? I mean, what does active hunting even look like in practice?
Well, it starts with threat intelligence. We need to be constantly monitoring for new threats, sharing information, collaborating.
Like that global neighborhood watch we were talking about?
Exactly. Everyone needs to be on the lookout, sharing what they see.
That makes sense. But what about those rad caves that might already be lurking in critical infrastructure? How do we even find those?
That's where threat hunting comes in. It's not just about sitting back and watching your systems. It's about actively searching for those subtle clues that might indicate a hidden attacker.
So like digital detectives scouring for evidence.
Exactly. Looking for those anomalies, those digital footprints that attackers leave behind.
Sounds like a tough job. How do they even know what to look for?
Well, that's where understanding APT tactics and behaviors becomes so important.
So knowing how the attackers think, how they operate.
Yep.
These guys, they're not just random hackers. They're professionals with training, with resources. They leave behind certain patterns, certain signatures.
And the threat hunters need to be able to recognize those patterns.
Exactly. Connect the dots, put the pieces of the puzzle together.
But finding these rat caves in massive systems like power grids or water treatment plants, that's got to be like finding a needle in a haystack.
It is, and that's where we're increasingly relying on technology to help us.
Using technology to fight technology. Makes sense.
Think machine learning, artificial intelligence. These tools can analyze huge amounts of data, looking for those subtle anomalies that humans might miss.
So it's like giving our threat hunters a super-powered magnifying glass.
Exactly. We need all the help we can get. But even if we find these rat caves, actually removing them, that's a whole other challenge.
I can imagine. These systems are so complex, so interconnected, one wrong move could have disastrous consequences.
Exactly. Remediation, that's what we call it. It's like performing surgery on a patient who's still awake and walking around. You got to be incredibly careful.
You do. One wrong cut, and the whole system could crash.
So it's a delicate balance.
Mm-hmm.
But is it even possible to completely eliminate the threat of APTs? I mean, they seem to be getting more sophisticated all the time.
Honestly, there's no such thing as perfect security, especially in the digital world.
So it's not about eliminating the threat entirely.
Right. It's about making it as hard as possible for them to succeed. It's about raising the bar, making the cost of attack too high.
So deterrence, basically.
Yeah. And that's where a multi-layered approach is so important. Strong defenses, proactive hunting, collaboration, constant vigilance, it all adds up.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, learned a lot about Operation Shady Rat, its origins, its tactics, its impact.
It's a fascinating case study. And a cautionary tale.
Definitely. So for our listeners out there, what's the one key takeaway you want them to remember?
I think the biggest lesson is that cybersecurity is not just a technical issue, it's a strategic issue. It's about understanding your adversary, anticipating their moves, and staying one step ahead.
And it's about working together. We can't fight this alone.
That's right. Governments, businesses, individuals, we all have a role to play.
Well said. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into Operation Shady Rat.
It's been a pleasure.
It has. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. We now know that these rat caves, these hidden back doors, they might still be out there, lurking in the digital shadows. Knowing that, what should we be doing differently? How can we better protect ourselves from this invisible threat? Until next time, stay vigilant.
Stay informed.
And stay curious.